I want to start by being very honest about something. I am not the biggest fan of women who, I guess for lack of a nicer way to say it, bark about the sort of standards that they have for guys and how if you're a guy that's unable to hit those standards or, match up to those standards, then you're unworthy, you're not of her level, her quality, and you should just buzz off. Like, I've always felt some type of way about that kind of shit. And for the most part, ever since after the whole tables argument, I've sort of tried to avoid talking about that kind of thing. But in this particularly unfortunate situation of mine on this episode, I kind of have to. And yes, I'm saying unfortunate because this is the part of talking about relationships and finances and money that just does not pleasure me at all. I don't like talking about it because it's not very representative of a lot of people, but also at the same time, there's a lot of people that like to bark about it, especially when they don't have enough facts or they represent a very, very tiny minority. But anyways, I am going to address it. But before I do any of that, where are my manners? Welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number one breakdown podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. The show is, at least as I'm still calling it, Raw Zone, where I keep it short, simple, go straight to the main topic, use very minimal editing, and have zero background music. Now, for today's episode, I want to address a tweet that I saw. I actually found it on a friend's IG stories, but I felt like this is something that just needs to be discussed because there's some things that have been said over here. Much as I disagree with them, I feel should at least be critiqued at the very least. Now, it was a tweet that was made by a woman, and I'm going to read it for you. So it says, and I quote, "Y'all will be attracted to a girl because she's well kept and high maintenance or have a hustle to her, but then get with her and think you can reap the benefits of that without contributing. You knew what it was when you signed up. Why do y'all think y'all get the privilege of dating a certain type of girl and showing her off like a trophy but not even helping to maintain the lifestyle she already proved she can provide without you? I was this way when you met me, so what I need you here for? It's not always materialistic or financial contributions either. You can lighten the load in many ways. What can you do for me that I can't do for myself? If the answer is nothing, it's no reason for you to be in my presence. I speak for all the ladies. We are fed up." End quote. Now, I'm not gonna lie, considering that the babe who posted this on her stories is 22 years old and just recently started working, I kind of found it a bit weird that she would post this considering that she barely has lived enough life as like a working class adult to actually have sentiments that are like this. Like, bitch, you barely lived life. What the fuck are you saying all this for? But anyways, that aside, what I probably should have been saying at this point, especially considering that I'm so tired of dealing with these topics and this whole dating and finances issue ever since the whole topic of tables in like 2021, like at this point in time, I should probably be saying, you know what? If that's what you feel like, that's cool. You do you. Go and date someone on your level. And when you find a guy that, is making the kind of money that, is like similar to yours and can manage to give you that kind of life, then that's all fine and dandy and you can be with him and blah, blah, go and live happily ever after, blah, blah. And I'm sure if you go online, you'll notice that there's just as many people that are fed up with these talking points as I am, and they will say the same exact thing. And if that's the case, maybe I shouldn't even be doing this episode because normally I'm supposed to try and give a different angle. Except that when I kind of thought about saying that for a second, I did know that it is right to say that. That's probably the best answer to give. It's just that I don't think we entirely understand the whole term of like being on the same level or go for someone that's on your level and what that actually means. And just bear with me on this because it seems like I'm about to belabor a point for another 8 minutes. But just hear me out on this one. Whenever people usually start saying stuff about going for someone on the same level or being on the same level with someone you want, I don't think they fully understand exactly what they mean. Because the whole term of being on the same level is a little bit more complicated than people actually think. Because most times when you assume that you're on the same level with someone, you assume that you can afford to pay for the same things, go for the same experiences, and as such, you guys are probably making roughly about the same, if not the guy's earning more. Even though the babe might be earning more, it's probably not by too much. Alright? and you guys can probably have nearly the same amount of, spending or financial makeup or just disposable income, to say the least. And yet the reality of it is that's actually not always the case, because when you kind of think about it, a lot of people spend money differently and will fall under about three very general categories of spenders, because there's people that live below their means, and those ones will save a lot. There's people that live within their means, and there's people who live above their means. Now, first of all, let me even start by correcting people a little bit. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't living within your means. That is living above your means, because you're one paycheck away from absolute meltdown, okay? But beyond that, I think everyone has a pretty good idea of where they kind of fall in this entire mix, and where, different other people and how they spend their money kind of fall into that entire mix. Now, the unfortunate situation that a lot of women kind of put themselves in, and I think even in general other people, is that they assume that because someone is spending a certain amount of money on something, they must be making X amount of cash and above, which is pretty much how people try to decipher how much someone makes, just based off of how much they spend on certain things and, certain priorities. And they sort of try to use that to gauge, which, let's be very honest, is very misleading, to say the least. And at the end of the day, you find that a lot of people will sort of think that, say, maybe if he drives a Porsche Cayenne, he's making X amount of money. Or maybe if he lives in a certain place, he's making X amount of money. Or if he's able to pay for such and such activities, then he makes X amount of money and above. And normally that's the belief that a lot of people and a lot of women have. And yet the reality of it is that's not always the case. You might imagine that a guy that is able to, say, pay for a certain event, or he's able to do certain things with his money, makes a certain amount of money. And yet the reality of it is it just ends up taking a much bigger chunk from his paycheck at the end of every month. And I'll try and give you a pretty good example. Let's assume that there's a babe who has signed up for VMX Fitness. And for those of you all that don't know what VMX Fitness is all about, it's pretty much the gym at the Village Market. It's one of the more premium ones. And because it costs about 100 G's plus a year, if I'm not wrong, then she'd probably expect that the guys that she's going to meet at the gym are probably earning well, or they're living off of some good inheritance money, or, they have a pretty nice stipend from their parents and shit. Either way, it's guys that can definitely afford to do a couple of things. And, the assumption is probably maybe she's making 300-400 G's a month. And, she's expecting that the equivalent guy that is going to be there is making about the same going up. And that's usually the assumption. And she'll try and snuff out the rich babies that are normally in the gym by, probably going in a little bit earlier, or going in during peak hours when these guys normally don't check in, because normally they'd be expected in there at like between 10 and 3 p.m. And, she decides to go for a guy that seems like he's doing particularly well for himself. Now she meets a guy, and she starts talking to the guy, assumes that this guy is making the same 300 to 400, checks in to the gym pretty early in the morning, kind of like the guys that also make quite a bit of money. But in reality, this is a guy that probably makes 150, maybe 200K a month. And what you don't know is that this guy just took the bonus that he got in December, which probably was like, his own salary on top of whatever he had, and he used the largest chunk of it to pay for the gym membership because he really wanted to join the gym and, work out and shit. Now, she'll assume that they're on the same level when they're talking and discussing and shit. And at the end of the day, she probably thinks that this guy makes roughly about the same. Now, let's add a little bit more complexity into that. Now, imagine this babe is staying at a pretty nice place, but she's staying with a roommate, because girls can do that from time to time. So they end up splitting the rent halfway. The guy stays in roughly about the same place, but the guy pays the full rent because he's staying alone. Because, normally, if you're a grown guy, staying with a roommate is almost the equivalent of like a slight step above staying at home with your parents, because your girlfriend or whatever potential babe you're with does not feel particularly comfortable being in that same exact environment where there's another guy that can find her busy walking around naked or with your t-shirt and nothing inside. So dude is staying on his own. So at the end of the day, on a cost by cost basis, this babe is making more and this guy is spending more. And that's even without adding shit like, the amount of miscellaneous costs that come from, say, family and parents. So he might be handling bills that go beyond him. And he might even be paying off a car loan while this babe takes an Uber and probably even works from home. So at the end of the day, this is a babe that assumes that this guy is making about the same amount, if not more, and can manage to live with the same kind of lifestyle that she has, which could comprise of fine dining, massages, and, a little bit of travel here and there. And yet the reality of it is, this guy, hell, even though he was making the same amount of money as her, could not manage to do that because he has responsibilities that go beyond him, and he is covering costs that she does not get to cover even though they make the same exact amount. So at the end of the day, you find that it's a guy who's actually not doing too badly for himself, but he feels like he can't match up because the equivalent babe who's making the equivalent amount of money just doesn't deal with the kind of costs that he deals with. Yes, maybe it might be expensive for her to get a weave and a wig and to get her hair done, but this guy is paying for insurance, he's having the car repaired in case of a problem, or he's probably even throwing in fuel whenever guys are going for a road trip. So at the end of the day, this guy is just spending more, and he has less to save, and yet he is supposed to be saving for the future, which you, the woman, believe he should be financially capable of handling 100%, and you're pretty much just living la vida loca, and you expect him to match up to the same kind of lifestyle. And you actually think that that's possible. Are you really, really sure that he's able to do that? Because at least by my estimations, if this is the case, then whatever quote-unquote dude that can match up to you needs to have in earnings, hoping that the expenses aren't too much, probably about 50% more. Now, 50% more might not be thought of as too much, because, if you're earning 30k as a babe, then the guy can only earn 45. But if you're making 300 as a babe, the guy should be doing about 450. Or if that number seems a little bit too big for you and you want me to bring it down to a little bit more of a reasonable amount, the equivalent babe that's doing 150 would probably expect to match up with a guy that's doing 225k. That's what 50% more is. You're technically on a different tax bracket for the most part. So at the end of the day, whatever the hell some of these babes are saying, talking about being on the same level, is actually a tax bracket above for quite a number of guys. And to be honest, when I thought this through, I actually kind of felt bad for a little bit. Because there's a lot of guys that just got back into the dating market, that just got back into the dating scene, that pretty much decided to go back into the whole dating market and try and find a babe, because after the whole moment of babes talking about how guys are creeps and shit and men are trash and guys pulling out of the dating market and everything, there's some guys that are like, you know what? These babes are saying that they want dudes right now. I guess it's probably my chance. And then you're seeing shit like this. And then you're reading stuff like this on the internet. Like, a bunch of these guys are just gonna turn around and go back. Because clearly, they're not making enough to match up to the babe. And the moment this becomes rampant and more guys decide to leave the dating market because clearly this is the situation, all of a sudden it's going to be the same babes that are going to be talking about how there's no guys to date in the market anymore. And out of that, there'll be no one to blame but themselves because they set the standard and they said that if we don't match up, we shouldn't bother. So to conclude all of this, I just want to say that whatever it is that you believe is your standard isn't always the case. Sometimes the person that you're targeting or the person that you want could be making more or could be making less than you. Are you comfortable with being with that person regardless of that small difference in terms of earnings? If you are, then great. If you're not, then clearly you can go and look elsewhere. But the reality of it is you cannot assume that just because you guys spend the same on some things that you guys make the same or the guy makes more in general. At the end of the day, that's not always the case. And the reality of it is there's a lot of people that live way above their means on some things just because either they're trying to climb or they just want to show that they have money. Although, then again, I might be wrong about all of this shit, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, on Facebook, it is at Breaktime, on our side, on Twitter, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.